Hi everyone, this is Mckay. Welcome to episode 155. I'm speaking with Jonathan and Josh Baker, the directors of the new feature film Kin. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Alan Mckay podcast. Alan is an Emmy Award-winning visual effects artist and mentor to many leading industry experts. Listen in as Alan talks with other industry leaders in film, video games, and visual effects about their experience, lessons, and methodology. Alan will teach you pivotal advice to fast-track your career, better your skills, and reach your ultimate dream job. Check out the latest episodes on alanmckay.com.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 155. I'm really excited for this one. This is going to be a lot of fun talking about the new feature film Kin that's coming out this week. It should be internationally released on the 30th and 31st of August. So this episode I'm going to be chatting with the directors of this film and dissecting a lot of both the feature film and going through the experience of making this film, but also a lot of what it took to get to that point. I've known the directors John and Josh for quite a long time, pretty much my entire adult career. I met them when I was 18 years old on the other side of the world, and I think it was very obvious to all of us that they were always destined for big things. I don't think anyone could disagree with that, and that was purely to do, I think, with work ethic above anything else. And that's where I think that this episode is really fun, is going behind the curtain a little bit about what it took to get to where they are and also the drive that you need to have. I think a lot of us sit by the sidelines expecting the right opportunity to land in our lap, and the Baker brothers are definitely proof about creating your own opportunities, to put the work in, knowing that you got to be in it to win it. And I remember at the beginning of my career, I would move closer to the office. I would literally move across Sydney so that I was 3-minute bike ride away from the office. So that way I could literally be there day and night working on my own things. When the render farm wasn't in use, I would be on it working on my own short films, my own projects, my own tests, my own ideas and concepts. And for me, it was that obsession, that living and breathing that passion that I had and making that my whole life. And the whole time that I would be obsessed with what I'm doing and working myself to death while other people are all at home having a fun time and relaxing, I would always remember in the next room, Josh and potentially John as well would be in there working on their own stuff, having meetings in one of the meeting rooms with people they're collaborating with, always doing things on the side. And it's having that drive, getting out of your comfort zone and doing all the things that others are too lazy to do is where you're creating that opportunity and really be able to level up. And I think that most of us aren't willing to do that. And that's why a lot of us aren't as successful as we could be, is because we're not putting in that work. I think that the Baker brothers are a really great case study, and I'd love to chat with them when time is less of an issue about their career and also just more of the strategy behind it. Because I feel like, I think more instinctively, they had certain big goals they were doing, and they were always moving forward, always pushing themselves, relying on each other, I think, as well, which was, I think, really a powerful combination too, but definitely something where they would be making the really big leaps forward rather than kind of inching forward a little bit. And it was because of that sheer drive for success and being so passionate and obsessed about what they're doing. So I think this is going to be a really fun and interesting episode to get into. And I think that we all can get a lot from it. And I'm hoping that's going to inspire a lot of us too, that whether it's later in our career or at the beginning of our career, this is a chance to really take the initiative and really make the most of it. Just because no one around you is having that drive and doing big things doesn't mean that that should be the level of expectation that you should set on yourself. I think that we all should be stepping up and pushing ourselves further, setting our own bar. I think Michael Jordan was really famous for that he would set his own limitations, his own expectations. It wouldn't be something that he would look to others or what's already been done as the level to beat. Instead, he would have his own obstacles that he'd want to overcome. And by setting your own goals, your own bare minimum, it means that you can be a lot easier on yourself or you can be a lot harder on yourself. And I think that applies to everything that we do in our career. If you go by what the average is typically a lot less. And that's something that if you get into jumping around a little bit, but if you get into the education system, a lot of people will look at course curriculums at universities, things like that, and look at that as like, okay, well, over a year, this is what you can accomplish. When a lot of those are set so low that you can accomplish a lot more if you raise the bar, if you set your own standards and really apply yourself, really push forward with it, rather than following on the bare minimum and what everyone around you does, rather than modeling and mimicking everyone else's minimal effort, really stepping up and really setting that tone for that high achievement. You can get ahead. You can get to all the things that you're setting out for. So I think it's critical just to take that away, that there are people who've had major success. And as we talk about in here, it isn't luck. It's very easy for all of us to say, okay, well, that person's just really lucky. And there's no such thing as that. But what they are is someone who sees opportunity, creates their own opportunity. They're not waiting around for someone to give them permission to succeed, but rather instead saying, okay, what do I need to do? How do I need to push myself? I need a strategy. I need a plan. I need a goal. I need to start moving forward and measuring my success, looking at my failures as just part of the process. The more that we do that, the more that we are able to really get those big strides that we need. So one thing I want to quickly mention before we dive into this episode is, if you haven't already gotten the Ultimate Demo Reel Guide, this is a book that I released recently that's available for free. Go to alanmckay.com/myreel and you'll be able to download that, as well as get access to a free 2-hour masterclass as well. And there's a lot of additional free videos and other things as well. So all of that is available at alanmckay.com/myreel. Finally, if you want to check out the show notes, go to alanmckay.com/155. And you'll be able to get links to everything to do with the film, as well as follow John and Josh on social media, as well as read transcripts, key insights and quotes, and everything else from this episode. So that being said, let's dive in. Thanks, guys, for taking the time to chat. I really appreciate it. And do you guys want to quickly introduce yourselves?
Yeah, thanks for having us. Hey, guys, I'm Jonathan. I'm Josh. We're the Baker Brothers. Thanks for having us on the show, man.
Like we were just talking about a second ago, I think it's just better to kind of dive right into it all. But I think... if you guys want to talk a little bit about how you started, did you guys come from Canberra originally? I think you were part of that batch, right? Because you had Eddie and all those dudes back then.
We actually met Eddie at Ambience when he joined there, but okay. we are kind of from Perth. We're from all over. We grew up in a place called Maitland, which is attached to Newcastle. We then went to Perth for all of high school and all of college. And then after that, moved to Sydney because that was kind of the only place in the country really doing anything on an A level. And so, yeah, not Canberra boys. Our dad lives in Canberra now. But we know a lot of those guys, though.
I'm thinking of Dylan Neal, I think, and Eddie. I think they both came from that, or Alex Fry as well. But
yeah,
that's cool, man. And yeah, I mean, for you guys, initially you started on design. I met you guys back in 2000, I think, 2001, something like that. And obviously you guys were more doing design and motion graphics back then, but it was pretty clear even back then that you kind of had that drive for film and doing a lot around the more cinematic world. So I mean, for you guys from the get-go, was that always your passion, or did you kind of more come in saying, all right, design, this kind of areas where we want to be?
I think we grew up having abilities in illustration and generally liking the design aesthetic for things. And so that was kind of our skill base. And we got into college back in 97 off a pencil illustration folio, both of us.
Nice.
And it's kind of insane when I look back. There was we didn't know Photoshop. We didn't know any of that stuff. We were basically just illustrators. And so then when we got into design school, we realized graphic design was probably the way that our skill would work the best out in the world to make coin.
Also, to be honest, you're at school and you get those little pamphlets of what you're going to be when you grow up.
Graphic design.
It was graphic design. There was graphic artist. We were always questioning what's the difference.
I don't know the difference between graphic artist, graphic designer.
So, and comic artist was another one that was
oh really
fascinating to us. So these were all just buzzwords. We had no idea what they really were at the time, and we went out and did a design course for 3 years, a little diploma thing, and
which turns out to be a pretty good one in Perth, where a lot of people have come out of that, and people who are now in the industry and doing different things from film to high-end motion graphics and stuff like that.
So cool. we dived right into design on digital sort of levels, from web design to early After Effects to
titles.
All that sort of title stuff fascinated us, and before we knew it, we were animating and doing all that kind of good stuff.
And I think it was probably around 2002, 2003 when we'd been doing it for a couple of years, and we realized that there was a ceiling on this stuff, that there was a lot of kids coming up at around that time. It was going from an old person's game to a young person's game. There was a lot of 18-year-olds coming in, like yourself, Alan, that were kind of taking over the game a little bit. And as, you know, people in our early 20s, we were kind of looking like, how long can we be doing this and pretty much doing what feels like a lot of the same stuff?
It felt to me personally like a lot of the designers around me were putting in 24 hours to design, and they were sleeping under their desks, and they were pressing render, and it just became this like siege that I was questioning whether I could hold up with that through my 40s, 50s, 60s, and it's like, is there longevity in this, or should we be doing something that I can see ourselves doing at like 65, 70?
So I think when it comes down, film was always something that really interested us. I remember when I was debating going to design school, there was something about film that was really kind of pulling on me. And I remember thinking, maybe I want to become an actor. And I was like, that's so silly when I look back, because I had nothing about me that was like, wanted to be an actor. Really, it was more about being involved in movies, and decided to go with like the skill base over the dream, or over something that felt like a little less tangible. And so it's funny that in 2004, pretty much, both me and John just started getting much more into live action and jumped ship into directing commercials.
No, it's awesome. I mean, I was just saying this a minute ago, but I mean, I think that anyone who knew you guys back in the day, I mean, it was just pretty obvious how driven you guys were, and that you're destined for great things. It wasn't like all these other people are kind of going in, they're doing their work, they're trying to get ahead, but you guys are literally creating your own opportunities left, right, and center. But yeah, I think that you guys definitely had that, like, that work ethic from the beginning. And, you know, it's something where most people are kind of like going in and doing what's expected, but with you guys, it was like, okay, like, what are we doing? Like, let's make a short film. Let's do an experimental piece. Like, let's always keep pushing forward. And rather than going at the pace of, like, let's say everyone around you, it's more at the pace of your own. Like, you're playing off of each other. You're pushing each other further. And I think that was always obvious very early on. It's just like you're pushing ahead at your own pace rather than
that's cool, man.
Expected.
I mean, honestly, that's the way we got out of one field and into another, is just by overlapping them and faking it as good, you know, as well as we could.
I think you hit on the key element as well, that there is two of us, and there is a natural competition in there as well, and you end up pushing each other to be better at what you do. And, you know, you don't want to sit back and look at your twin brother that looks like you and has the same initials as you and the same interests and talents as you doing great things, and you're like, what the hell am I doing? So it naturally kind of pushes you there. And when we ended up combining our skill set and our reels and a bunch of things, and decided to work together as twin in advertising specifically, that just felt right, because it was like, why compete? Why don't we just be more powerful and do this together?
Yeah, we can be more like Voltron if we put our reels together.
Just need a few other limbs. That's cool. And like, do you think could you identify any like key characteristics that kind of made you guys stand out? I mean, because again, I think it's easy for people looking in, but for you guys especially.
Definitely. The one thing that comes to mind is being a sponge for what is being done. And I don't do it as much anymore. I actually care a little less about that stuff. But I think it's important, especially when you're coming up and trying to build your own voice, of just knowing what else is being done and what's out there, and just having a general awareness to good work. And it always amazes me when people don't know any of that stuff, because you're like, well, a lot of this is trend-based. A lot of this is like people are going to try stuff and then that's going to catch on, and you either want to be just ahead of that trend or like really, you know, the leader of it. And then it's going to switch to something else, and you kind of got to know what it's switching to, or else you're 2 seasons behind doing old work. And sometimes that works for people, and I'm sure fine artists are, you know, out there doing their own thing. But when you're doing a commercial skill like graphic design or even live action to some degree, you kind of want to know what's happening around you.
And that's something that we've seen in film as well, just as we've sort of transitioned into making our first movie. You don't want to be that guy that is the least aware of references from other movies and things that have been done before and techniques that aren't so original anymore.
Camera moves that have been done to death.
So like having an awareness of what is out there in the sort of sphere of what you're involved in, I think is important. And then, like you said, having that drive where everyone else is sleeping and you're working or at least conceptualizing something and being motivated to move on that in different ways has definitely got us ahead. You know, I've always said what we lack in talent, we make up for in drive. So
that's cool. Yeah, I think the key word is that obsession and drive. I think are both of them. And at least Josh, I can talk more specifically about you, but you know, I'd always notice that you are kind of filling out the areas that maybe you don't have as much experience in. So like, you know, you're starting out, you know, doing many different styles in design, but then starting to kind of, just as you're leaving Ambience, I think just as we all were, jumping off that ship, but you know, you're getting into flame compositing, getting the grading, you're learning 3D, treading on all our toes. So, you know, but it just became pretty obvious. It's like you're filling out your skill sets that way. At least you have an understanding of all the tools available to you.
Educating yourself, right? Like just knowing what's being done by everyone, and I really can find parallels between all of that stuff in design and the film world that we walk in today. That you want to know everyone's job on set better than they do in a way, and so I see a lot of directors, and it's a very specific style, but a lot of directors, especially in commercials, are kind of like, well, I don't handle that, you handle that, and I'm just the guy that. And you're like, well, yeah, but you're also the director and you're the funnel for the entire shoot. So really, you should know everyone's gig. You should know so that they know, you know, what to expect, because you've got really high standards. And that's why guys like David Fincher are as good as they are, because, you know, they literally could do everyone's job better than them.
And it's not so much a micromanaging thing. It's more just an awareness. And there we come back to awareness as well. It's like being able to speak the language of different people within your department, and do it in an educated way, in a smart way, so that they don't feel like, you know, you don't know what you're talking about.
Completely.
Do you guys ever read Rebel Without a Crew, Robert Rodriguez's book?
No, I know of it. I haven't read it.
No, I mean, it's just like, that's like one of the kind of, I guess, addendums you put at the end of the book was basically that learning everyone else's job scares the shit out of everyone, because suddenly there's no BS, there's no gray area. It's like you know the process, and therefore you can, you know, not necessarily do their job, but you at least know, you know, what's required. And I think that's really powerful when you're kind of at that top level.
Absolutely. And I think there's a respect level that comes from crew when they realize you know what you're talking about, you can have a conversation about it, and they're not babying you through things or rolling their eyes because they're like, this jackass doesn't know what he's doing.
Especially as a first timer.
Yeah,
that's the last thing you want, is for a very experienced crew. I mean, as a first time director, you know, we've been in advertising for 15 years, but for a lot of first time directors, they may be the least experienced person on set.
Yeah, everyone's been on set.
And they happen to be the leader of the whole thing. So it can be a very politically sort of turbulent environment if you're not on your A game. Yeah,
that's great. And I guess like one thing that is the oddest thing to remember, but I remember having a conversation with Josh just about how you guys used to like win competitions all the time. And it's such a trivial thing, but I think it kind of plants a seed for something much bigger, which was that you're saying that, you know, you guys enter like every contest that ever you read in a newspaper or a coupon or whatever, you'd always like collect that stuff and send it in. Just because like no one else does.
For a long time, but you're right. Keep going.
But yeah, like no one else does. They all think, well, you know, someone else is going to win, why bother? And therefore you guys win big on everything just because you are actually taking the initiative to do it. And I think it kind of comes back to like, you got to be in it to win it. And I think that most people are already kind of giving up at the starting line, whereas you guys are like, fuck this, like, you know, let's do it. And then therefore, you know, we have the opportunity, and you won't have that opportunity if you don't actually try in the first place.
Well, one thing that comes up a little bit that I hear is you twins have such good luck. And it's like, well, yeah, I guess there's a little bit of that.
It's magnified because there's two of us.
Yeah,
I get that.
Yeah, I'm sure, you know, there's alarms going off over here because there's two of us doing, you know, the same thing. And so it may look that way, but I don't see it as luck as much as being in the right place at the right time. And when you're having an opportunity put in front of you, knowing what to do with it, you've already visualized it, you know where you're going, you know what you want. A lot of people just don't know what they want, and when the opportunities arise, they miss them.
I think that's partnered with a confidence of knowing that it's always going to work out. Like, you know, you just know that I know where I'm going. I know what I want to do. I know I'm making a movie. You know, the financiers may not know that yet, but, you know, we're going to get there.
Right. Totally.
Yeah, I think that you kind of nailed it. Like, I think that a lot of people, they're always waiting for that one opportunity, and they're really blind to the fact that, like, if you're in it, if you're doing it every day, you start to see opportunities everywhere. And most people are oblivious to it, and they're because they're not trying, they're waiting for that permission to come along, instead of like just getting in there and realizing, like, fuck, there's opportunities everywhere, and it's more about picking the ones that you want to do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
That's so wise.
Yeah, I mean, for you guys, like, what was it like kind of make that transition? Because obviously you guys moved to the US, and I just want to kind of clarify, did you guys ever initially want to get into features, or was it more kind of a transition over time?
Yeah, look, it was one of those things where it was always in our future, and we never put a date on it. We were never the guys to be like, here's our 5-year plan. It was always just, we'll get to a movie one day, and it's something that we're interested in. But right now, commercials are mini movies. It's something that, we were building the skill set because we'd only really just entered it a few years earlier. So we moved to New York in 2007. We'd probably been directing proper full-time since 2005. 2004 had some like straggling design work kind of entering into it. And then when we got to 2007 in New York, we teamed up, put our reels together, and hooked up with a production company there. Mm-hmm. And I guess when we did that, we were like, movies will come. But right now we're focusing on ads, and you realize you're putting years into setting up relationships and working on bigger projects, and nothing feels big enough until you've got a handful of stuff under your belt and you're not feeling like, I guess, you're faking it anymore. And so movies was always on the horizon, but we were living in New York, so we weren't in the lap of the Hollywood world by being there, which was a choice that we made on purpose to live and do business in New York. And then quite quickly, in 2008, we got an agent out of the blue, because the short version of it is we got offered a $100 million animated movie by a big-time producer in Hollywood. And he came over to New York and he gave us the script, and we read it and we didn't like it. And we said, this is so not us, and I could never see myself doing something, let alone this size, which I think is a bad move for a first-time director to do anything at that height. And so we turned it down, and we felt really bad about turning it down. And the guy was like, had a smile on his face and said, don't worry about it. We'll just find you another one. If you don't like this, it's all good.
That's great.
But at the end of the meeting, he said, who's your agent? And we said we didn't have one. And so he said, all right, well, let me hook you up with my favorite agent. And it just turns out his favorite agent is still our agent today, all those years later. And every time we talk to someone, they say, oh, man, I don't know how you guys got him, but he's the nicest dude in Hollywood. So since 2008, we've had this agent who sends us stuff and looks at our ad work, and he's like, really impressed by the stuff we do every day. But he's offering us things that are either really big that we'll never get, like Passengers. We pitched on that back in 2009-10.
The Spirit Brothers film? Or no, sorry, Passengers. I'm thinking of
the one that was going to be Keanu Reeves, came from Keanu Reeves' head, and then ended up being a movie with Chris Pratt that felt slightly underwhelming. And then there was the small horror projects that they offer us, and we were like, we don't really see ourselves as those guys, and so we just became very picky. But Hollywood was always there in the background while we were doing these ads. It was always something that was kind of becoming an option. But we were picky enough to say we're not going to jump on our first movie as just someone's random project that doesn't feel like it's ours. We're going to get monster trucked by a studio. And, at the end of the day, it's always going to be sitting on your IMDb. Mm-hmm. So it just became something that we always, for the last, I'd say, 6 years, looked into what speaks to us. And what's going to be personal, that when we put this first film out, it's our voice and we own it. And I guess that's where Kin comes from.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And I'm guessing that a lot of it came initially from the concept of Bagman when you guys teamed up for that short film.
Yeah, well, but Bagman came about just because we were in advertising for so long that we were getting a little stressed at how we're not being able to stretch our legs, and we're playing with 30 seconds, we're playing with 60 seconds, and we're not being able to sort of play up the more quiet narrative side as directors. And so we just went out and started playing with experimental things. We did a little thing called Little Kaiju, which was kind of a short based in Tokyo about this little CG character. And then this other experimental thing of a guy with these shoes on, and you know that well because you worked on it. And after a while of having these little side projects going, we were saying, there should never be a time when we don't have something like this happening, because it allows you to invest all of your energy. You know, you're making money doing these big commercials, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, if no one ever saw them, you'd be comfortable about that, because they don't define you. But these little side things, you're learning a lot. You're expanding your creativity, and you're collecting a great crew doing it. And so they were really, really fruitful. And so that just ended up leading to Bagman, which was the first really serious one that we dedicated our time to, and we wrote and put it together. And we were in New York at the time, as Josh said, and so we shot it locally. It was just easier to do it that way.
And we used all the crew that we had built up over 9 years, 9 years of favors with visual effects companies and production designers.
Guys like The Mill, helped out for free. And obviously it took longer than it should have, but that's because we're all just doing it on the side.
Right.
It comes together finally, and went to South by Southwest in 2015 and got a staff pick around end of 2014, I think. And just, got a lot of eyes on it. And it was something that we didn't make as a proof of concept. We didn't do it to get a movie off the ground. It was a very self-contained story that was like, no, this is a 15-minute story, and this is what it is.
And it asked a lot of questions at the end, and it had a quiet journey to it, which is something we really wanted to experiment with. But then also we wanted to flip the tone and have something that feels like it's mixed genre. You feel like you know what the short is until the 10-minute mark, and then it completely flips on itself.
Yeah, such a shift.
Yeah. And I guess that was the purpose of it, of like, can we do this and make it work in a fluid way? And since that was a decent success, I think when people started asking what the longer version of this was, we're lucky that we during the post time had sat down and said, look, if someone asks, what are we going to do? And we came up with the themes and characters that we thought we'd be interested in telling in a longer story.
Loosely based off Bagman, but also, opened up into a whole new sort of story and a whole new world.
That's great, man. It's really cool. And I guess, like, what were some of the biggest challenges, like, especially coming on first-time director and having that experience doing some shorts? And I'm sure it's night and day different when suddenly you've got an entire crew and a huge process that you're completely invested in. So what was it like? What were some of the big challenges for you guys when you...
It is and it isn't. In some ways, it's very similar to doing the stuff that we'd been doing before. And it was amazing. Me and John looked at each other on, like, the first week of shooting the feature, and we're like, it's just like we're making an ad. It's kind of the same thing. It's just, this thing's going to go forever. It's about the marathon rather than the sprint. And that was a cliche that was told to us at the very beginning, like, make sure you pace yourself and you don't burn out in the second week. Because it's very possible a lot of first-time directors jump in and try to do everyone's job, and they're staying up really, really late to try to get everything done, which sometimes needs to happen. But if you're not careful, you'll burn out, and then you're up to day 45 and you're a zombie.
Mm-hmm. You got to eat well, you got to sleep well, you got to really sort of manage your time, which we'd never had to deal with before. I mean, like, if you look at advertising and making commercials, there are financiers, there are the studio with the agency. There are a lot of like easy comparisons. And so, you're dealing with large budgets that, you can't mess it up. It's someone else's money. A lot of those lessons we learnt in ads. And so stepping into making movies, it felt very at home for us.
We were doing a lot of things for the first time, though. I mean, there's no mistaking it. We had meetings for car chases, and then you're with the Matchbox cars and stunt guys standing around you, and you're like, I've seen this on DVDs. I've seen this before.
I'm in the behind the scenes, finally.
Totally.
There's a lot of those moments, man, the pinch me moments. We just did our director's commentary the other day for the entertainment, and it's like, man,
how did we get here? It's nuts.
What's that like? Being on the flip side of, like, dissecting every single other person's film and suddenly being like, all right, shit, someone's going to be doing this to me now.
Yeah, and you realize as you're going through the film and you're talking about it, you can't just talk about every single thing that comes on screen, or else you just wouldn't stop talking. So you got to kind of pace yourself, tell a few stories. It's tough, but it was really fun.
You know what we realized quite quickly is that if you're not in love with your film and you're not proud of it, it would be a very, very difficult process.
It's very draining.
Right now we're in publicity and marketing stage of the movie's release, and we're talking about it every single day like we are to you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you didn't love every part of that and were proud of it and wanted to put your name behind it, like how hard would that be? Even sound mixing, like little, scratches on a nail board, like that's just not the right tone exactly. Like, who cares if it's a crap movie?
I agree, man. I mean, no offense to Sharknado, but like if you were making Sharknado 7 right now, I don't know how you would get through the process and go to sleep every night going, we're doing good work. Because it's been so long. I was saying to John, we can't even see the whole project as the one piece anymore. It's like all these sections. It feels like we've done 4 projects because you got the casting. Before the casting, the whole screenwriting process took like 10 months of trying to get these drafts to the place where it needed to be. And then you're casting, and then you're in pre-production, and that overlaps into shooting, and then take a little break, and then you're editing forever. Like we edited for 7 months, and that's a long time to rock up to the same couch in the same room and sit with the same people and talk about the film over and over again. And then obviously post, we've got a decent visual effects side of things. Into sound, which was a really extensive process, and one thing that we probably had the least experience with of professional sound and working with professional sound teams. And so mixing, we mixed this thing for 2.5 weeks. It was incredible. You're just going to the same dark room and making the movie better. And then working with Mckay, the guy's Scottish band that we managed to get on this film by the grace of God. And these guys were amazing, doing their first feature with us doing our first feature. And we're all kind of figuring it out together and came up with some really nice music. It just feels like the project is so damn big that it just feels like it's spread over these 3 years.
No, that's awesome. And yeah, I guess that's a good point that you're bringing up too, is like, are there any moments that you're going through it that you're kind of uncertain of, like, oh shit, like we're in it now? I mean, and I guess not doing it alone, having, the two of you play off of each other probably helps in those moments. But
helps dramatically.
Definitely, man, massively. Mostly in boardrooms with people in suits looking at you.
I don't know if it makes me half a man, but I look at other directors and I'm like, I don't know how you do it. Like the amount of pressure that's singly on your shoulders is mind-blowing.
Yeah, completely. There was some facets that felt like that. The visual effects side of things was not one of them. I feel like we've got a decent amount of experience there, and I think our visual effects teams. We worked with the guys at Image Engine in Vancouver. Weirdly enough, Dave Morley from Fuel Days back in Sydney, working there as a supervisor. And when we were going through visual effects teams to work with, I remember seeing his name on the website and going, oh my God, like what are the chances that we know the guy that's going to be involved in this? So we had a chat to him. He was interested. The company was interested. And then suddenly we're working with the guys who made District 9 and Elysium and Chappie and doing some really nice hard surface stuff with the space weapon in our movie with the same team. And it was great working with Dave Morley because we had a shorthand already, and it's kind of the way you want to do a visual effects experience for your first film, is to work with someone who cares and not just be, another project.
He gets how we work, and those very occasional emails that you need to put in and say, like, bro, I don't know how we're going to do this, but I need your help. I need your support. And he's like, I got you.
Yeah.
That's just, priceless.
Yeah, it was awesome. And it really kind of threw us into the deep end of doing some intensive visual effects with a team that felt emotionally engaged in the movie, and we were emotionally engaged in them. And so it was a really great process.
That's so cool. Yeah, I've actually had like a lot of the supervisors from Image Engine did a roundtable a couple months back. So it's,
cool.
It's so cool talking with them about all the creature and hard surface experience they have.
Yeah, man,
cool. They're good people.
Yeah, good guys. And we found that they were the right level of company for a film like this. Like we're a small movie posing as a big movie. Essentially, Kin is independent spirit. I mean, before Lionsgate came involved, it was an expensive independent film. And the tone of it was R-rated originally before we went PG-13 once Lionsgate came involved. And we felt like we didn't have to make too many sacrifices to get it there. But the tone of the film was very much an adult film with a 14-year-old kid as the lead, not a kid's movie. And so it was tough the whole way through the process trying to police that. And me and John be the guys that are constantly reminding people that we're not making the next Power Rangers movie here. Like, it really needs to keep a certain tone, which is fairly indie-spirited, even though we're dealing with some pretty big stuff and there's some, epic blockbuster style sequences in it, but they're all sitting over the top of something that feels very indie. And that's really what the tone of this film is that was the challenge to pull off.
That's cool. I love it. I can't wait to see it. And just curious, with the titles, I guess, like it definitely feels like in the trailer, it's got a bit of a retro feel to it. Not only the titles, but also some of like the LED light ups for the weapons, things like that. So, I mean, where did you guys kind of source your inspiration for that? And also, who did the titles?
The titles, fairly simple. They're a team that, funny enough, we went to college with. The lead designer on, his name's Ryan Hayes, really great guy that works at MPC London. And they really helped us out with designing a typeface for the film and for the titles, and creating some of the sort of sci-fi otherworldly language, I'll say, that ends up sort of being some of the iconography in the titles and things like that. It was fairly simple.
We wanted to keep it sophisticated and I guess, like I was talking, like an indie film. We didn't want to have a big Marvel sequence at the front of the movie.
Yeah, we talked about it. At one point, we were thinking of doing like quite a big animated end title sequence, but it just felt like it wasn't this movie, honestly. And, why try to sort of force fit it into a Marvel world when it's not that. It's kind of the anti that.
I think there are some retro influences in there. I mean, me and John grew up in the 80s. We're almost 40 now. And so a lot of the films that really had a giant impact on us was, things like E.T., Amblin films, but also, just the wish fulfillment concept. The Flight of the Navigators and The Last Starfighter really punched us in the face and was kind of the stuff that we were diehard for.
In terms of like nostalgic sci-fi, and then some of the more darker stuff like Alien and Aliens and Terminator series and things were great. But that's on the bigger side. Then there was a lot of like independent cinema that through the 70s, 80s, 90s that really hit us as well. And we wanted to try to keep a very textural, grounded world. And it was the combination of those two things that felt very unique and we hadn't seen before. So
we've been lucky that the poster work and a lot of the artwork that's coming out is doing a pretty good job at reflecting the film. It's a struggle to try to manage people's expectations of, obviously the studio wants to make it seem like a giant film and there are giant elements and we've got some really cool sci-fi in it, but we want to be careful that, you don't lose sight of some of the more intimate stuff in the film and people come out going, what the hell? That was a different movie.
It was quiet and boring.
So, there is both in this film, and I think that's why it feels like more of an adult film to us. But some of our poster work has that nostalgic quality.
I love the posters. I love the posters. Like I was just at watching Meg, great film, just recently. But yeah, all the posters coming out, like they're awesome. Like they definitely are captivating, have a bit of a different feel to it. But like they're turning out great.
That's
nice,
cool.
I'm glad you're responding to it. One thing that we've tried to sort of bring to the film in general, but specifically the back end, is just working with people we've always loved, whether it's conceptual designers, whether it's poster designers. We have a limited edition Mondo style poster coming out by Ken Taylor, and he's just one of our favorite poster designers from the last decade, and we own a lot of his stuff, and the fact that he's doing something for us is a dream come true. And then you look at like Mckay, who's creating a studio vinyl album release that we will have as well, and there's a lot of things that end up becoming separate lives.
Yeah, if you're going to make a movie, why not make cool elements that you would really get into surrounding the film? And
it's a complete selfish.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally like, if I was watching this film, what would I want that to be? And that's kind of the core of it. You make the movie for yourself, and I made it for John, he made it for me, and hopefully there's a few people out there that respect it the same way.
I think that kind of communicates beyond that too. I mean, if you're passionate about it, and it's kind of what you guys have been consistently saying throughout this as well. I mean, it really shows in the work that you're doing, and by going that extra step and building all this additional content around it, kind of just shows like, yeah, this is something that you stand behind and you care about. It isn't commercial in the way that you're saying if you don't love it, then you're not going to be able to sell it. And
definitely. We realized only a couple of weeks ago that it's not about good or bad at this point. I think we made a good movie. It's about is it your cup of tea or not?
It's a very tough one because we live in a culture that is about that is the best movie I've ever seen and that is a piece of shit. And there is no middle ground.
Like or dislike, but you know what I mean?
Like or dislike, that's it, man. Thumbs up, thumbs down, for sure.
So we just have to start being more comfortable with the fact that, it's just not for everybody. It doesn't make it bad. It just makes it for me.
Yeah, not
and we walked out of directing our first movie. It's not a small thing. I mean, it's a medium-sized Hollywood film. It's a big film. And I feel like I now have a new respect for bad movies, to be honest. Like, when I see something I don't like, I'm not shitting on it. I'm kind of just like, well, you did your thing. It's hard, man. Well done. Not for me. I'm moving over here, It's a different perspective.
Walk away slowly.
It's a different perspective. It's like, it's really hard to make a bad film.
Yeah.
And it's impossible to make a good one.
And I think the downside of social media and all the stuff that we're dealing with right now on the internet is just everybody thinks that they can do anything. They've all got blown out egos. And so they see a film that someone put 3 years of their life into and they're just like, nah, that's a hard pass. And you're like, but
it's a tough audience, man.
Fighting.
But I think that's the key. That if we're making something for ourselves, and there's going to be people that are into it as well, and it's going to become a cult thing, and you just know there will be love, and it'll be diehard love, and forget the rest.
Yep.
No, I think you're right, because I think that the key goal that anyone should be aiming for is that you want to get people to really love it or really hate it. If you're trying to please everyone, then you're going to get everyone to say like, yeah, it's okay. But like, owning that and doubling down is going to be the way to get anyone to respond to anything.
And we're also in an industry with a lot of giant things because everyone wants to scream louder than the last. And so this movie is for people that want original stories that isn't based on a YA book and isn't a remake of certain old things.
It's not a comic book.
It's not a comic. It's like it came from the head of two skinny Aussies that, put out an original sci-fi story and, trying to push the genre forward.
That's great, man. And in terms of visual effects, obviously you guys are pretty confident in that area. You guys already mentioned that. I don't think that that's like a new genre for you. Do you think that having that background of coming from visual effects, compositing, design, having experience and exposure in those areas made you more confident when it came to shooting all this on set?
Yeah, I think so. I think, like we said before, I think it's just knowing how to speak to that group of people that you need to motivate and need to get the best out of. And so coming from a visual effects background, having experience in working in post, and just knowing as a director in advertising how to speak with those people, I think definitely helped.
I think that we wanted to also make a movie that didn't have any green screen in it, and it's tough these days. But there's a certain frame of thinking, I think, that goes into that of like, we're not doing giant backgrounds of, fakery.
This is Indiana Jones 5.
Just to put it out there, we succeeded, right?
Yeah, we did. I mean, it's something where that kind of adjust your frame of thinking when you're making a certain visual effects project of like, we're not going to be the green screen guys on this one. So it just kind of pushed us into practical is such an overused buzzword, but it is down that frame of thinking. And so, a lot of our visual effects were based around practical elements.
Even our big visual effects were just kind of comping over practical lighting and within the set build that we had and rig removal and all of that kind of stuff. It still has a very in-camera, practical, tangible vibe to it, even though there is a lot of big visual effects put over the top.
And I think your visual effects companies always respond to that. I think there's a challenge to that. And I think they're probably a little sick of just pulling green screen keys and dropping in complete fake backgrounds over the top of a badly lit actor. And that's something we tried to avoid on this as wherever possible.
Which studios actually worked on it? Obviously, Image Engine. Who else?
I mean, it's
small, man.
It's small. We basically gave it to Image Engine for 80% of it, and then we used a Toronto company to back it up and do some of the smaller work.
Mr. X or Soho or who?
It was called Rocket Science.
Rocket Science. They're a very small team over in Toronto, but they handle a lot of the paint out and things like that. But largely, Image Engine, took sort of 80% of the work. Yeah,
that's cool. That's really great. Yeah. No, I think it's really cool. And just curious, like, finally, what cameras were you guys shooting on for it?
Well, we shot Alexa minis. We mostly tried to keep it to 2 cameras, dominating A camera over B where possible. We shot up to 4 cameras for some of our action sequences, which is new for us. We're not used to having,
Freedom.
monitors to look at. So it was nice to feel like Michael Bay for a couple shots. The aim from the beginning was to make it not feel like Alexa, and so we worked with our DP Larkin Seipel to really kind of mess the image up, beat it up, he says. And so we also colored with the Moonlight colorist, Alex Bickle, and so we kind of added grain afterwards to really kind of beat the image up and make it not feel like traditional Alexa, and I think we did that.
Yeah,
there's obviously a 35mm quality to that, but it's kind of becomes its own thing.
Right.
It just doesn't have the typical digital look, and it doesn't necessarily have the film look, but it's probably closer in that world. It's got texture.
Yeah, the good thing about it is it doesn't feel super duper crispy. To play into that indie sensibility, the last thing we wanted is a really clean image, and so it's a fairly grainy film. And we were lucky enough that when the trailer came out, the guys at IMAX saw the trailer and was like, this is something we'd love to feature. And so we're doing an IMAX release in the first week internationally, which is kind of nuts. And they use some of their software to kind of reduce the grain when you put it up on a giant screen and just kind of keep the grain size the same, even though the screen's now 3 times as big. And going in for the approval in IMAX was one of the cool highlights of the last couple of weeks.
That's awesome, man. It's so cool. Yeah, it definitely has that gritty feel to it. It doesn't have, like, it feels very, like a lot of vibrant colors, especially because, you kind of underplay that with at least what I can see in the trailer, but it doesn't have, you're right, that kind of creamy Alexa polished feel that a lot of digital these days tends to automatically get.
Totally. And I would advise you to check it out in IMAX because it does look exceptional. And when I first heard about it, I was like, is our small little movie playing on IMAX like the right choice? And then you go in there and you see a close-up and you see an emotional scene on an IMAX screen at 65 feet. And you're just like, wow, it makes an impact. Like, it's really cool. Good. So our visual effects scenes look amazing and our intimate scenes look amazing. And big fan of IMAX. That's
cool. Yeah, I should be back in LA when it's coming out. So I was going to go ArcLight, but maybe I'll have to swing IMAX instead. That's so cool. Yeah, I'll start to wrap things up. But I guess one thing I think would be really critical for everyone who's listening who does aspire to get more into film, whether it's short filmmaking or going more ambitious than that. But what key advice would you have for them? Because I feel like, again, there's a lot of stuff that we kind of touched on a little bit, but you could probably kind of lean into a bit more.
There's a couple things, man. One thing we say is if you're working on cool stuff, people will want to be involved. And I think a lot of the frame of thinking for people coming up is, how am I going to get people to want to be involved in my project?
How am I going to attract this DP or this musician or this whatever?
But I think the truth of it is, from an insider's perspective, from DP to visual effects to production designers to casting agents, if you're doing something cool, most of the time people want to be involved. And so I think a lot of the way we've had people jump on board this project, whether it be Bagman or Kin, is because they're like, wow, this is unique and I really like your take on this and let's rock it out.
And to further that, you just have to ask. I mean, you ask and you either get a yes or a no. That's a 50-50 chance, right?
Right.
Do you think that people underplay that a little bit? They don't think to ask. They just kind of, don't put themselves out there that way.
Look, I think we live in a society that loves to put things in boxes, and that, including yourself, you feel like maybe I'm not big enough that they'll take it seriously or whatever. But I think you just put yourself out there a lot of the time, as long as you can back it up and you have respect for your creative people around you. I think asking goes a long way.
How critical do you think it is to build relationships with doing this sort of thing?
I mean, we wouldn't be here if we didn't. I think this would be a very different experience if we had done 2 short films and then jumped into Hollywood. So, we're not going to underplay the sort of time it takes and really putting yourself through the trenches and meeting people and doing small things and making mistakes and learning from that. I mean, it's obviously all part of the journey, but yeah, we've arrived, at least. We feel like this one is kind of what we were working towards for the last sort of decade at least.
Right.
I'll leave it there, but where would we go to find out more about you and also obviously about Kin?
Well, you can definitely find stuff online at Kin on Twitter, hashtag KinMovie. It comes out August 31st internationally, at very least a couple of days close to that date in some countries, but North America's 31st. Australia, I think, is the 30th. Mm-hmm. And getting like a big international release is pretty special, man. Like, we looked at the release schedule, and it's going out to Mongolia, Iran, Iceland, Cambodia. I mean,
wow,
that's pretty awesome.
That's great, guys. That's so cool. And like I said, I mean, I honestly think that it's no surprise to anyone who knows you guys, because, you know, you've put in the effort and the work from day one. It's not like, you know, as you said before about people saying like, you guys are so lucky, and it's something that I think a lot of us have to kind of retrain ourselves to say, to, because we want to be humble and say like, yeah, you know, it's all luck, but it's like, no, it's I'm fortunate, but it's all hard work. It's something that's taken time, and you guys have definitely put in that time to kind of land where you are, and I'm really excited to kind of see where it goes from here.
Thanks, man. Really appreciate talking to you. You know, we've been big fans of you since back in 2001, so it's kind of a nice turn to be able to do an interview with you on your show.
Okay, I want to thank John and Josh for taking time out of their busy schedule to chat. I know they're in the middle of pushing this film out internationally, and they're doing a lot of flying around over the next couple of weeks, so I appreciate them taking the time out to talk about everything. And also, I hope that everyone got a lot of really great insights from this episode as well. I think that, again, this is one where these guys have had such enormous success, and I think that this is literally just the beginning of their careers when it comes to the next stage of what they're doing. And I can say that none of it was because of luck or anything to do with that. It's been pure hard work, but also I think being very strategic in how they do it as well. And I think that's the key thing, is that they've really had that drive, that passion, that obsession with what they're doing, but also knowing that you got to be in it to win it. You know, going back to what we talked about with entering contests where most people wouldn't, and that was the key reason why they would win them all. It's such a small little anecdote, but it's one that if you were to dissect it, most people don't even try in the first place because they're like, this won't work out. And so being able to bank on that in the first place, knowing that most people set out to fail, and therefore if you just put in the work, if you put in the time, you're already ahead of everyone else. And like I said at the very beginning of this episode, I think it's such a critical thing that just because the people around you aren't doing the work, they're not getting out of their comfort zone, they're not pushing themselves, they're not really leveling up every single day, that doesn't mean that you need to set that level of standard for yourself as well. This is where setting your own standards, setting your own goals, your own expectations is the way to move forward, rather than looking at everyone else around you as the gold standard of who you need to be. Be your own better self. That being said, I'll be back with episode 156 next week, and I'm going to be focusing on the one thing more powerful than your demo reel. And in case you haven't noticed, I've definitely tried to cover all bases with your demo reel. It's one of those things that this month I've really put a lot of focus into. After this month, we'll be moving on to a completely different subject, but I wanted to really cover this out. And it's funny, I actually did a live reel review webinar with all of my private students from a mentorship this morning at like 7 a.m. And again, a lot of what we go through is so critical. And I think that now that there is a lot of content that I've built out around this, I can actually say, go check this out, go read this, go do that, get the Ultimate Demo Reel book. In fact, if you want to get the Ultimate Demo Reel book free, go to alanmckay.com/myreel and you'll be able to get it there. It's going to be available on Amazon and Audible pretty soon for like $35, $40, but you can get it right now for free. So while it's available, go to alanmckay.com/myreel. And in addition to that, you'll also be able to get access to the 2-hour masterclass too. But the key thing is, by doing all this and really fleshing it out, it's been really effective because now you have all the tools you need to get work. And I think that's one thing that a lot of us really overlook. We make a flashy reel, but we don't know how to sell it. We don't know how to sell ourselves. So all of these resources have been focused on really just fleshing this out and really putting out all the insights needed to get the success that you need. And like I said, as we move into next month, I'm going to be covering a whole different genre. and really fleshing that out as well. So there's lots of really cool stuff coming up. But next episode, I want to focus on something around your demo reel, but the most effective thing, more powerful than your reel itself. So like I said, if you want to get the show notes, go to alanmckay.com/155, and I'll be back next episode. Rock on.